Good morning. We continue with Pastor Don's summer series here. I've been meaning to ask. Last week we looked at where are you from. Today we look at where do you hurt. And the scripture is from Mark, the 5th chapter, starting with verse 21. Jesus crossed the lake again. And on the other side, a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came forward. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded with him. "My daughter is about to die. Please come and place your hands on her so that she can be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A swarm of people were following Jesus, crowding in on him. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Because she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, "If I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed." Her bleeding stopped immediately, and she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. At that very moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "Don't you see the crowd pressing against us? Yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus looked around carefully to see who had done it. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward. Knowing that what had happened to her, she fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. He responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease." While Jesus was still speaking with her, messengers came from the synagogue leader's house saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher any longer?" But Jesus overheard their report and said to the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, just keep trusting." He didn't allow anyone to follow him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. They came to the synagogue leader's house, and he saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "What's all the commotion and crying about? The child isn't dead, she's only sleeping." They called at him, but he threw them all out. They laughed at him, but he threw them all out. Then, taking the child's parents and his disciples with him, he went to the room where the child was. Taking her hand, he said, "Talitha Korum," which means young woman. Suddenly the young woman got up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. They were shocked. He gave them strict orders that no one should know what had happened. Then he told them to give her something to eat. The scripture that precedes this sort of sets the stage. Jesus and his disciples had crossed over the lake, the Sea of Galilee. And they had encountered a storm that was threatening to sink the boat, and Jesus had calmed the storm so that they could get to the other side. And there was the man on the other side who was possessed by spirits, and Jesus healed him. This is the case where the spirits were released from the man and went into the pigs, and the pigs ran off the hillside into the water and drowned. The man wanted to go with Jesus, and Jesus told him to stay there and to tell others what had happened to him. What's interesting here, when you look behind it, and the reason I wanted to take time to highlight this, is the setting here is that this area, the Greek word is Decapolis. Decapolis, which is translated from the Greek to mean 10 cities. There were 10 cities in this area across the lake on the eastern side of Lake Galilee that were all Greek. And they were somewhat independent. And so you see here that tucked inside here, there's an indication that what's happening with Jesus' ministry is not reserved just for the Jews. There's this spreading out into the area, and some of these cities were in the area of Samaria, and so the area that Jews wouldn't have anything to do with, Jesus is in ministry there, and not only that, he's leaving his embassy there, ambassador, to tell others what had happened to him at the hands of Jesus. And then we get to the healing that takes place here after Jesus has crossed back over the lake. The man that he encounters, the leader, one of the leaders of the synagogue, William Barclay, takes it a step further and says that he was the president of the synagogue. I thought it was interesting that the synagogues were organized administratively as well as they were spiritually. The leader of the synagogue was not necessarily one of the Levites. He was just a person who had some power and was in a position of leadership. They're also called elders, president of the elders of the synagogue, that took care of the business, organizing the business. Not unlike how we organize the Christian church, in that we have people that are set aside to provide the leadership administratively on one side and spiritually on the other side.
And they fight with each other?
Probably.
They form a committee to figure out what they can do to pull themselves together.
No, that was reserved for the Methodists.
How about parking lot meetings? Oh, there you go.
Probably.
You get more done in the parking lot than you do in the
Yeah.
actual meeting.
True.
I've heard that before.
It is true.
To me, the significance of knowing this about who this man is and coming to Jesus is we know the backdrop that was going on in Jesus' ministry, that the Sadducees, the Pharisees and Sadducees of the Jewish faith, they were mainly in Jerusalem, but all the synagogues were subject to them, and they were after Jesus. They didn't like what he was doing at all, and they were after him and trying to destroy his ministry and actually to cut it off. And so for Jairus to come to Jesus is really saying to the Sadducees and Pharisees, you're not doing anything for my little girl who's dying. With Jesus, at least, there's his reputation of the healing that is happening around him gives him hope. He doesn't have hope within the Jewish system, but there's hope outside, and he goes to Jesus regardless of what these Sadducees and Pharisees might do to him. And Jesus agrees to go with him for his daughter. And then en route, they encounter, the crowds are pressing in, and they encounter this woman who has had this problem with bleeding for 12 years. The scriptures don't point this out, but understanding the culture of the day, an open wound or bleeding of any kind is to say that you're unclean, and you can't be, that you're not supposed to be around where other people are. So it meant for 12 years, this woman had been, for practical means, had been ostracized from the community, cut off. and she too is looking to Jesus for the same thing that Jairus is coming for, that she hasn't hoped from any place else. And so she's coming to Jesus hoping that something is going to transpire that will heal her. It says that she touched the edge of his garment. William Barclay describes it this way. There was an outer robe, he calls it, but it was actually an outer garment that was worn that was rectangular in shape, with a place cut out for the head, so it could be slipped down over your head and draped front and back, and then would be cinched with a belt around the middle there. And that from the four corners there were tassels. If you were a Jew, there were 4 tassels that were attached to that were commanded back in numbers. And so people who profess the Jewish faith, profess to be following the Jewish faith, would wear this garment and have these tassels. And Barclay puts forth the idea that it is one of these tassels that the woman reaches out and touches. That she thinks that probably she can touch one of these tassels without drawing any attention to herself. Drawing attention to herself is the last thing she wants. Number one, she's not supposed to be out in the crowd. She's unclean. She is out there. She's supposed to be letting people know she's unclean by calling out, unclean, unclean, so people can stay away from her. But she slips into the crowd up to touch Jesus, and Jesus recognizes that something happened there, and stops to find out what's going on. Who is it that's touched him? Because he recognizes that there's been a transference of power from him to this woman, and he wants to know who she is. And she comes forward and confesses everything before Jesus, and he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease." And while this is taking place, messengers come and tell the synagogue leader that his daughter has died. There's no need for Jesus to come on. It's all over. And Jesus says to the leader, have faith. It's not all over. And to come on and we'll go, and he takes Peter, James, and John, and these 3 disciples figure other places in Scripture as the disciples that Jesus seems to favor, or either that or they were more discerning than the other disciples as to what was going on. Although sometimes it seems that Peter didn't discern at all, that he was kind of dense sometimes. But as they go, there's a commotion around the house. And here again, in looking at the Jewish customs and culture, there were within each Jewish community people who went about the business of mourning, is the only way to put it. There were people that were supposed to cry out. Wailing is a word that's used there. That was their role in the community where grief was being expressed. So as soon as this word of this girl's death, they would show up and start wailing to let everybody else know that death has occurred here. There were some instrumentalists who would show up and play. So it was quite a commotion, but it was kind of orchestrated. This was just what happened in the community. There were people in the community who did these things for the families of the community. And talks about the rending of clothes, that you would tear your outer garment down to the navel as a sign that you were experiencing grief. For the parents of the one that was deceased, the tear would come on the left side over your heart. For the others, it would be on the right side, just as a way of signifying your relationship with the family. For women, they were to go into private to protect their modesty and to rent their garment and then turn it around so that the tear was on the back side of the garment and that they could be out there. And then there were also, Pastor Don talked recently about the laws that were written down. One of those laws that was written down stipulated that after 30 days you could sew up the tear, but you had to sew it up with very coarsely, so people would continue to know that you were grieving. And then after another period of time, that you could go ahead and mend the garment in the way that you would normally mend a tear in the garment. So grieving someone who died had been codified within the Jewish system. There was prescribed things that you did, and they were written down. Well, weren't committed to memory. They were just not just traditions. They were written down. Another significance here is that in verse 41, taking her hand, he says, Talitha Koram, which means young woman or maid. Talitha Koram is the Aramaic. And there's a tradition that is held among scholars that the Gospel of Mark was the preaching and memory of the Apostle Peter. And that Mark was his companion, presumably John Mark, who Paul talks about later on in Acts, who didn't have the stomach for the ministry that they were doing and went home, drawing Paul's dissatisfaction with him. But the fact that this is in Aramaic seems to point back to Peter, and that Peter was one of the ones that was in the room there. So really there were only 6 people in the room there. There was Jesus, the mother and father, and then the 3 disciples. And he says to tell no one. Everybody else just knows that the woman, the girl is now alive, who they thought dead is now alive there. So earlier in Mark's gospel, he's dealing with people, the healing is dealing with people who are possessed by demons. Here he's dealing with people who have physical ailments that are being healed. And where there is no hope, he's providing hope not only for them, but for people who hear of what has happened, providing hope for everybody through their faith there. And I can see by the clock that I spent way more time than I normally spend and have to do some editing here. But we'll see what Pastor Dawn has to say to us a little bit later this morning as she expounds on this in this new series. So may God's blessings be upon you.